Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming here tonight on this, what is actually a summer day outside, and I know you all want to be sitting outside in the park. Really excited to be here tonight, so excited to be here with this amazing group of panelists who I know is going to have so much useful, insightful information for you. I will start then, for all of you job seekers out there, I'll just have you talk a little bit about the roles that you are hiring for right now. Nancy, you can start.
Sure. I'm Nancy Ashbrook. I'm with Vice Media, and many of you may have heard about Vice recently in the news. We have been expanding our television side of the network pretty aggressively, and that's where some of the opportunities are, mostly involved in production. On the AP side, meaning the assistant producers, and up through shooters, etc.
I'm Joe Farrell. I work at Hearst. I support digital and tech. Gosh, where aren't we hiring? I mean, everything from engineers to ad ops to audience development, editorial. On the digital side alone, over the next 18 months, we're going to be staffing up another 140 people. So the growth is just incredible. We're doing a ton of stuff right now on the video side. So a lot of producers, shooters, and then I also support Hearst Tech as well. So that's both infrastructure and engineers, data science, full tech stack.
Great. I'm Nina Temple, and I'm from Google. I'm with Google. I am a Googler, an alphabet, a letter. So my role is a global staffing lead for one of our businesses, which sits in the sales organization, but bridges both sales, support, services. So we hire within that business group. We hire operations people. We hire call center folk. We hire operations. We hire technologists. So we have an array just within that business group, but across Google, we're hiring everywhere. Again, like Joe said, sort of everything from engineers through to the people operations organizations, so recruiters, HRBPs, analysts, you know, the whole smorgasbord, all through the sales organization. So we are very busy.
Hi all, I'm Alexis. I'm with Vox Media, and Vox is 8 really strong brands. You may have probably heard of many of them. The Verge, SB Nation, Vox, Eater, Curbed, Racked, Polygon, and we are hiring like the rest of the folks in this group. It's a great time to be looking in media today because we are hiring as well across the board with over 100 positions I think we'll be looking to staff this year. So it's a nice time to be out there and looking.
Great. So obviously you're all hiring across the board and there are different skill sets required for each type of position. But what is one or two things that you look for regardless of position when you're hiring someone who is a student or for an entry-level role? Do you want to take this first, Alexis?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So we're a media technology company, and we like people who are particularly I think one thing that sets us apart on the content side is we tend to hire people who are particularly strong voices and authoritative in their passion areas. And so it's not, we don't have an opportunity for someone to come in and say, hey, I'm a really good writer. I could write across 3 of your brands. It's you come in and say, I'm really passionate about something, let's say in the restaurant space, and I want to write for Eater, or I want to work with the Eater team specifically on this because this is my passion point. And I think that's a differentiator, at least for us as we look to hire talent and content creation. I think folks who have, often looked with some experience in doing that before, and that doesn't have to be professional. It could be what you're doing personally with your own blogs or sites or however you create content. And then I also think about the importance of communication in general. So obviously early in your career, you may not have a particularly extensive resume, but I think the extent to which you yourself are articulate and can demonstrate that the leadership for that appropriate level and that curiosity goes a really long way.
Yeah, I'll absolutely second that. So I think at Google, one of the things we always talk about is liking to hire general athletes. Mm-hmm. When we think of the way the industry changes, we're hiring people today for, who we want to stay at Google for roles that may not even exist today, right, in 5 years' time. So if people are just very, very niche, then the chances of them being able to necessarily flex their skill set, it may not last and may not be able to evolve as the organization evolves. Mm-hmm. So I think that general athlete piece is really important, but to your point as well, having that passion and really being able to evidence that passion in an area is key, right? So we're not going to be able to hire anybody, even at that entry level, into a software engineering role who isn't absolutely passionate and very good as a software engineer. Same for somebody who we want to hire into our small to medium business advertising organization. You're going to have to evidence that you have shown interest in that and you have been involved, you understand, what the market looks like. But I think having that breadth, and telling the story in your background they're really important pieces.
What we look for, regardless of function, somebody that is very flexible. We're very much a fast-paced, scrappy type of environment, so we definitely need people that can go with the flow, who can pivot. We promote a lot from within, so if somebody is starting at an entry-level role, they can very quickly move up the ladder. So we want people who are smart, who can take on a lot of responsibility. We try to have somewhat of a flat hierarchy, which helps to allow people to try and do new things as well. And again, to add to the point, certainly passion, someone that wants to learn. I call Hearst, it's a 130-year-old startup, so because it has that energy.
Vice is known for its storytelling, so people who are very curious would probably have an advantage. Someone who's very articulate, who can identify something that would be of interest to themselves, that could be interested to a wider audience, would be very appealing to us in terms of a candidate. Similar to everyone else on the stage, yes, people need to be somewhat flexible, they need to be smart, articulate, they should put their energy into what they really want to do. For Vice in general, it's ideal for someone to be very clear about what they would like to do and the contribution that they would like to make. Not just that they want to work at the company, but what specifically they would like to do. Because the best person for the job is somebody who really wants that job, not just to be at the company. So even if it could take a little longer for someone to get their foot in their door, it's probably worth it to go after something that you really want than to just try and get your foot in the door and take any job that may be available.
That's a great point. I want to talk a little bit about how people can show that they have all of these skills that you have just talked about. So when you're looking at a resume, a cover letter, other materials that people submit throughout the application process, what are a couple of the things that you look for? And I'll let anybody take this and jump in.
I guess it depends on the role. So if I'm recruiting for an editorial position, I'm going to see what type of experience they have, what kind of background they have, if they have an internship, a blog, something that is relevant to whatever that editorial position is. Internships are really good. Past experience, what have you done work-wise through college? Things like that. When you're entry level, you have to be able to totally differentiate yourself from the rest of the pack. And how do you do that? Maybe you have a blog, maybe you've developed your own website, you've developed an app. I think those types of things are really going to make you stand out from the rest of the crowd.
I think also for us, one of the things I look for is, first of all, I always look for a cover letter. And in particular, I want to see and find out why you want to be at Vox Media, right? So we talked about the importance about the job, which I agree with. But for us, I want to know that you didn't just throw your resume to the same job at all four of us, for all four of our companies, but you know enough about our company and you've done your research to say, this is why I want to do this with you. It's just one of those personal things. The more you tell someone else why you like them, they probably will like you a little bit more, right? So it's kind of human nature. But I want to know that you've done your research and that you show it in the cover letter.
Yeah, I'll take the opposite tack of
Yeah.
I actually don't look at cover letters.
Great.
And it's insane that I haven't hands-on recruited for a little while, but when you know, when you look at the applications when they come through in the system. I mean, I can have a funny anecdote as someone who works at Google that I can remember seeing, you know, applications, hi HR manager at Yahoo, you know, and things. So to your point, like, don't get them wrong. If you do them, make sure that they're not sort of sent out to everybody, so be specific. But I don't look at them because to me there's a lot more in terms of I know what I'm looking for and I need to see that it's there in the resume, and that's more important. So I think the key things, you know, and to Joe's point actually, you know, having that thing, what is going to differentiate you from everybody else who's applying, so which goes back to the storytelling piece and having the passion, being that general athlete, but the story that flows through, even at entry level, you can evidence the passion, evidence the fact that you've put the work in. This is something I'm passionate about. Here's a link to a blog. Here's a link to, you know, anything else that can reflect the work you've done, whether it be an internship. And you don't need to have 10 different internships. You can have several different ones, but if they weave their way through, and you can sort of see the breadth and depth that you're showing in what you have done, I think those things are really important. Oh, and no typos, no grammatical errors.
This is why I like cover letters.
So I would absolutely say, like, have other people read your resume. Read it backwards, someone once said to me, because if you read it backwards, you're not actually reading the words, but you're looking for those typos. But the fastest thing to get a resume moved to the no pile is, you know, is that sloppiness, because we're looking for details and specificity.
What are some of the other things that make a resume or a cover letter move immediately to the no pile, or mistakes that you see candidates commonly making?
I'm going to say one. If your parents send in your resume on your behalf, it's going right into the trash.
Does that happen?
Yes, it does.
Is this a common thing? Does this happen to you guys?
I haven't seen it.
I haven't gotten that.
Wow.
Just me.
In case anyone is tempted, don't do that.
It's unnecessary.
If you spell my last name wrong, that goes in the no pile.
It's just absolutely get every single basic right. You know, if you're intent on doing a good job, you know, if you're going into sales, looking for a job, you are selling the most important product ever. You're selling yourself. So just be thorough and be detailed, and, you know, and do your homework.
Yeah, the more you can know about the role and about the company and about the things that, look at all the cool stuff that we're doing, that's only going to help you, as opposed to sending each of us your resume for any job.
So let's talk a little bit about the interview process. What does the interview process look like at each of your companies, and what are some of the key things that you're looking for?
Most of the time it begins with a posting, and it could be one of two things. Sometimes we go out clearly and reach out to people directly, and primarily we use LinkedIn to do that, or other internal referrals from employees that can also pass people along or expedite their candidacy. Additionally, we post our openings and people apply. So once that happens, if you're contacted about it, which could be at any point in time, try and answer the phone professionally. Don't answer the phone if you can't really talk about it, and if you don't recognize that phone number, because it is off-putting to somebody who is trying to reach you. It's better to have it go to voicemail and then pick it up at a later time. But many times it does happen through email, so don't be surprised, and please, again, no typos. It does really turn people off. Spell check's automatic. And that's the first place to start.
At least for me, once I've established and gotten that resume, and I'm going to reach out to the person, I'm going to have a preliminary phone call with the person to get a better sense of what their interests are, why they're interested in this role. You know, one of the things I always ask is, you know, what is it about the role, and what is it about Hearst that is appealing to you? And, you know, if I feel like they're a good potential fit, then I will bring them in for face-to-face. And what I try to do is, in all first rounds, it's myself and then the hiring manager. I don't want to waste people's time, have people come back in, you know, 3 or 4 times. Now that might be if they're coming in for second, third rounds, but I really try to have the first round be myself and then the hiring manager right after. And then from there we determine yay or nay on who we like, who we don't like. And then we take it from there.
So for Google, we have a pretty well-documented process, and it has evolved significantly over time. So what you can anticipate these days, so if I focus more on the non-tech interviews, you'll have, however your resume reaches the recruiter will reach out and schedule a phone interview. So that is that sort of that overarching, do you have the core experience? Do we get the sense that you have the core fit for Google? And if that goes well, then we bring you in for on-site interviews. Google loves our data, so we've done a lot of research in terms of what we believe is the sort of the right number of interviews and the best way to interview to really understand whether you are going to be the right fit for us and we'll be the right fit for you as well. So there are 4 interviews, all 45 minutes long, and we cover 4 different attribute areas. So we look for your raw smarts, we look for leadership skills, we look for problem-solving abilities, and then we look for your ability to actually do the job. And then we have, and again, it's all incredibly well documented, so if any of you do interview for Google, do your research, because it's all out there. But there are a couple of different types of questions that we ask. So one is the more hypothetical, and then the other one is more behavioral. So a behavioral question would be much more, tell me about a time when, right? Tell me about a time when you were on a project that failed a week before the deadline, and how did you turn it around, or something along those lines. And then the hypothetical question would be putting yourself in a future orientation. Imagine you're in a client meeting and the power goes out. What do you do next? Things along those lines. And then the process from there, we have hiring committees that review all of the information that comes from your resume, from references, from the interview feedback. And that leads to decisions whether to extend an offer or not. So that puts us in the position where a hiring manager isn't, I need a body to do a job. Right? We don't hire based on that. We hire based on, is this somebody who is going to be a great addition to Google now and in the future?
I think that's all really so interesting to hear. And we're at very different scale organizations. And I think that's something to note as you think about both the opportunities out there, of course, but the way that you might engage with an organization, right? So that's exceptionally well documented and really thoughtful and quite interesting. I love that sort of a whole process. We're about 600 people, which is a little different than Google's size, and so most often you're interviewing directly with the hiring manager or with the group that you might be working with specifically. And so I think about that as relates to you're interviewing with someone who would be a teammate of yours, so something to keep in mind. And then I also think about think strategically about the amount of time that the interview is, and try to answer the questions where you give, this is more tactical, where you give like enough of an answer that they can, the interviewer can then sort of expand and follow up, but not so much that you're talking on for quite a period of time, because that's actually it. The interviewer does want to achieve something during the interview process, and if you speak for an extended period of time, the interviewer might have to feel like they're cutting you off, which isn't socially all that fun for anyone. And so just be cognizant of the length of time you're talking, I think, is one of those just good tactics to have.
Great. Nina, you mentioned a few questions that you like to ask at Google. What are some of the other questions that you commonly ask? Some of your favorite questions?
So we've gone through a little interesting cycle at Google. We used to ask what we used to call like brain teasers, and we've moved very much away from those. So you may see at various places that we would ask questions like, how many golf balls do you fit in a school bus? And it was meant to be, what is your problem solving? Like, how do you think through how you would calculate that? Anyway, we don't do mean things like that anymore. We thought it was a good idea at the time, but we iterate at Google. So I think so I work in the staffing organization. People are critical. I like asking people questions about, tell me about a time when you didn't get along with a peer or a manager, and how did you resolve the situation? Because I think it is so telling about how somebody operates, how somebody works, right? Interpersonal issues are challenging to deal with. So that's one that I enjoy. Yeah.
I ask a couple things around, all the getting at problem solving and stuff. Two that come to mind in particular is how, one, or what are you most proud of? Like, so give me an example of something you're most proud of, because I love to hear people It usually relaxes people, and there's something that someone has done well through the course of their life at any stage. And I love to hear what really energized that person and how they did it and why. And it could be personal, it could be professional. And I love to see that person come alive in the answer usually. I also tend to ask a bit about, I recognize that we are all human and we all have flaws and we all work on teams, and I look for people where a team can be really complementary. So I want someone who can try to be self-aware about what do you need on your team to make you better, and how can you, of course, make the rest of the team better, and someone who is able to talk about both their strengths and their areas for improvement with a pretty healthy self-awareness.
When talking to people, I want to get an understanding of what would be a good interpersonal relationship for them at work. So I'll ask them about their prior bosses or some of their colleagues and what type of relationship they had, what made a good boss for them, and to see if there could be a mutual fit between the department that they're joining and themselves. Because if it doesn't work there, it's going to be very difficult to move forward.
I think that's a really good point. We haven't talked too much about the culture of the organizations in which you're all considering, but obviously that's really key. And I think when you ask a question about, what did you like, and whether it's prior work environments or other environments where you liked the culture, you didn't, what didn't you like about it, and then you can usually hear where they may or may not be, the candidate may or may not enjoy working with you, and that's a really key part for all of our organizations.
Yeah.
I tend to have more of a conversation. So initially, I don't ask a lot of questions. I want to get to know the person. I want to find out what they've done, what their experiences are, why the interests are. And then from there, it kind of segues into more questions. The one question that we're starting to ask more, which I think is kind of interesting, is describe yourself using one word and why.
What about questions that, when it's a candidate's turn to ask you questions, what are some of the best questions that they can ask you?
About our culture, about, a lot of times they'll ask what a typical day is like, and I can tell them what my day is like, but my day might be different than what their day may be. Asking about the culture, asking about, what the organization is like, things like that.
One thing I would think of when you should definitely forward plan and think about what questions you want to get answered. Take a notepad, right? Jot things down, because as you go through the interviews, the conversation may lead to more questions that you want answered. I would steer clear of just like stock questions, right? Just so have a reason for asking a question. And one thing that I've seen work really well is the transparency of, and if you ask your colleagues, you'll know that I'm asking the same question, but I'm really interested to get more of a 360 to see what everybody answers this question, right? I think it can be, having that transparency piece can be helpful, because sometimes if you do a debrief on a candidate and everyone's like, well, they asked me that question too. And it's like, well, did they not think of another question to ask? But if you're saying there's a reason behind it, that can really change the dynamic of how it's received. So be thoughtful, yeah.
And definitely ask questions. When you have an interview and you've asked someone and you've sat with them for a half hour, 45 minutes, and you turn the table around and there are no questions, even if you've met with a handful of people throughout the day, you would think that anyone coming into an organization would want to know something about it. So at least at the default of, hey, how did you get here? What's your path? What's your experience been like? Something that gets to what is it going to be like, day to day for me in this environment, and am I going to enjoy it and thrive here? Because again, regardless of what the role is, that's so much of what life is like, right? Is figuring out if you want to be somewhere day to day.
It is. It's mutual.
Yeah.
The job has to fit for both of us. So if you don't have any questions at the end of the interview, it doesn't seem that you're very curious in it. Additionally, I'm never offended if people ask me, how did the interview go? What do I see as next steps for them? And to have that candor about where do I think that they fit for the role. I don't find that terribly off-putting. I feel that they really want to understand what's going to happen next, and to have an expectation of when they'll hear back or what the next steps would be or what the rest of the interviewing process would look like. Those are always good things to know.
Just to pivot off that, I would say sometimes, and maybe this is the different scale of the organizations, but if you're working through a recruiter, so in Google's process, you would speak to a recruiter and then you would come in for on-sites with the team. The recruiter should say with you, I'll follow up with you after the interview. So in that instant, my sense would be, you could sort of say, I've really enjoyed meeting with you. I look forward to following up with the recruiter and hope I get to speak with you again, or something along those lines. So be sensitive. Every process can be different, and listen for the clues every time. And if you work through a recruiter, ask the recruiter, right, what is the best process? How should I follow up? How will I know? So that you then gain the insights.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about social media. How do you, as recruiters, use social media? What do you look for? Do you search candidates on their social media profiles? What do you look for? What mistakes can they make?
So many possible mistakes can be made. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest warning. And if you're starting to apply for jobs, Google yourself, scour the internet for any mention of your name, and make sure whatever is out there represents what you want to be represented as. So be really, it's a branding exercise. So, if you look at yourself and there's not enough out there, or it's not professional, or it's not geared towards what you want to go into, how can you increase your profile and your presence online? That's huge. People have had offers rescinded based on information found online. If you're putting a blog together, make it really good. Because that, again, if you put a blog on your resume and then somebody looks at the blog and it's like, not very well put together, that's going to be, you're not even at net even that, and that's a negative, not a positive, or not even an even. So just be incredibly mindful of all the pictures that you allow to be posted, what access you give. I cannot overstate that piece enough.
I think about it like a lot of the roles are content creation related roles, right? And how you think about the content that you are creating for yourself. Especially in all of our companies are very, very digitally forward, right? So if you're coming in, you're sort of an expectation that you're probably very good in the digital world in some way. Now, you don't have to be on every platform, excellent at everything, but you may have a strategy where you pick and you say, like, Instagram is my thing, right? Or Twitter is my thing, or whatever it is. I think owning that presence and putting yourself forth in whatever story you're trying to tell the world about yourself, whether that's for professional purposes or otherwise, I think can go a long way, again, if you take that seriously.
It is challenging to differentiate between your personal life and your professional life. Inevitably, they do collide, and many of the jobs, particularly in the content side, expect you to have a social media presence to continue on with that aspect of your job, whether it's a social editor or whether you're doing writing or producing. It's not unusual that you will have to develop that personal part. You should be very clear about where one stops and the other begins. Because we all do look. I mean, inevitably, everybody is looked at and pursued or not pursued on occasion.
Yeah, I mean, it depends, on the role that you're looking for. So if you're looking to join Cosmo, for example, then your social media should be focused on the content that Cosmo is putting out there. So you want to make sure that your social media interacts well with whatever brand that you're interested in pursuing.
Great point. What about LinkedIn? How much do you use LinkedIn?
Every day.
Every day.
Constantly.
Continuously.
Do people ever reach out to you on LinkedIn? And if so, how do you typically handle that?
Candidly, it varies, and it has to do with just regular workflow and things. But what does interest me when somebody does a very personalized note to me and message me that way and attach their resume or refer to something that they're interested in the company. But if it has to be very targeted and specific.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, I get LinkedIn messages all the time, and the more personal you can make it, the more relevant to whatever that particular job I'm recruiting for at that point in time certainly is good. I would highly recommend everybody to do whatever you can on LinkedIn. That's how you find jobs. That's how you grow your network. I don't remember recruiting before I had LinkedIn. I mean, I did, but I don't remember really what I did. Monster.
Yeah, I would just echo, everybody uses LinkedIn, so use as part of your social media strategy, really make sure that you're buttoned up, and again, sort of everybody, we all receive LinkedIn messages, but if it's just, hi, I'd like to be part of your network, I don't know who you are, so no.
Yes.
Whereas, I mean, for me now, I'm not directly recruiting, but if somebody sends me a very thoughtful, LinkedIn note and sort of says, I'm very interested in these roles for this reason, and the time has been put into it, the chance of me saying, let me see who's recruiting that role, and just forward the email to them, and then there's a huge difference. So it's again with all of these things, be so thoughtful. Every time you send something out, think, who's this going to? Why am I sending it to them? Am I being specific? It all counts.
And make sure that you're not using the same picture for Facebook as you are with LinkedIn. I mean, unless it's a professional picture, but you always want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward from a professional standpoint for LinkedIn. Sometimes I'll see pictures of like guys like, and in like a party type setting, and might not be the best means to be attractive to a potential employer.
Professional organization.
Yeah.
I think somewhat related, but maybe mostly because I think most of what you should do has been said. But I want to mention is that apply to the job directly. In my recommendation is apply to the job directly through whatever means that company has of applying for the job. So for us, it is online, on our website, all the jobs are listed, and then let someone know that, oh, by the way, I applied for this, I'm really interested in it, here's why, as opposed to pinging someone and saying, hey, I'm really interested in that job, because you think you might be able to circumvent the recruiter to go directly to something, or you want to get passed along. Just put your application in first would be my recommendation, and also recognize that we may not collect quite as much data as Google, but part of it is being able to aggregate and use the systems itself and leverage systems as we're doing our jobs. So that's actually the best way to, at least for us, to get in the door.
Great. And then one more question before we move to audience Q&A. What is something else you'd like to share about your workplace or your culture, or the number one best piece of advice you have for someone who's applying to a job at your company?
It's a very open plan environment. So when you come in and you see the receptionist, you never know who else is around. It's worth it to be polite and courteous to everyone that you interact with, particularly in a very casual environment. You may not realize who else is sitting there.
I would say for us, as you might imagine, because we have all these different passion points that people are really interested in and passionate about, it makes the company, I think, very exciting, because you get to meet all these people who are kind of experts in their field. And I use that broadly. Like, I think of everyone as wanting to be to develop and pursue their craft, and that craft might be writing, it might be creating content, it might be storytelling, it might be sales professional or an engineer, or particularly on our product team. There's so much pride in the work, I think, that gets done, and I love that about our culture. It's also an environment in which we strive to be incredibly, to show each other a lot of respect and to be very inclusive. And so, while no one's perfect at it, it's something we strive for quite a bit, and we want that in the new candidates that come through the door, in our business partners we work with. And so if that's something you also, you personally care deeply about, it's about creating a company where we are also striving to do that as well.
Yeah, I would second everything that has been said so far. I mean, you should always treat people well, right? But I've heard of people who've had argy-bargy on the subway, and then they've walked in and realized that the person that they kind of did that to in the subway is the person who's interviewing them. It's really not a good way to start out. So you should just always treat everybody with good intent at all times, just because that's the right thing to do. Which would probably lead me to one of the things. I mean, I've been at Google now for 11 years, and I am so proud to be a Googler and so proud to represent the culture and what we do. and doing the right thing is really important. So that's in every facet, with the work that we do, with the how we do it, how we treat one another. We have, we call it Respect At. So there is a whole team set up where we really do try and make sure that we modify one another's behavior and make sure that we are being respectful at all times and behaving appropriately. But it's also an environment where there's lots of innovation and there's lots of energy. So we love lifelong learners. So being excited and being interested and being curious, those things are a very good fit and a sort of part of what makes life at Google so exciting.
When you think of Hearst, you think very long, rich history. It was founded in the 1800s. William Randolph Hearst. Newspapers, magazines, but so you wouldn't think normally. Okay, are we really innovative? Are we really forward-thinking? We very much are. And the thing that I like the most about what we do, and I mentioned earlier, we're a 130-year-old startup, is it is that in the digital and the tech world, the growth and the opportunity, we're constantly innovating and re-innovating. And it's just, there are a lot of smart people, and whenever we have an opening, we're always trying to find, as good as that person was who was in that role, we're looking to always find somebody who's better, who can bring more to the table, who can continue to innovate. And that's really something that I think makes us as successful as we are.
Great. Thank you all. And now I get to turn it over to you to ask questions to our panel.
Hi, my name is Kurt Suchman. I'm a junior writing student at Ramapo College of New Jersey. And I just had a question of, before we were talking about, finding your niche field and sticking to it, but also as a writing major, you kind of have to, especially when I'm trying to go into journalism, you kind of act as your own photographer, your own editor, your own producer, things like that. And it just makes this interesting dichotomy that could be hard to maneuver. So how exactly can I stick to my niche, but also, explain my other talents, my other skills that I have outside of that?
So I think there are a lot of roles, and I can't speak for all our companies, but I think there are a lot of roles, certainly at Vox Media, in which you as an editor are also doing some other creative elements of it, right? Like you're creating the story, you're creating the content. There is the, whether you're adding photos to our platform to actually create your long form feature, or thinking about how something might be produced. I think there's a lot of creativity that comes in at play. And then I also think about the ways in which you can create content that maybe, for us, it may be more on like Vox Creative side, where you're telling a story that's, multimedia as well, for our brands. So I think there's many ways you can do it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very much appreciated.
Hi, my name's Jeff. I'm a graduate of the New School here in Media Studies. And when it comes to writing cover letters, I assume it's best to address it to a specific person. Should that be the HR rep, or if it's like an editorial position, should it be the editor of that section? And if it's a position that's not for a specific section, say like copy editor or editorial assistant, should that be addressed to the editor-in-chief? And basically same question when you're following up after applying, do you reach out to the HR rep or the editors?
At least for us, all the resumes come to HR. So if you're going to address something, you would address it to HR. But I think to your point, I sometimes read them, I sometimes don't. I think every company is different. But by all means, certainly put all your effort into the cover letter to make sure that you are differentiating yourself among the rest of the group.
So would it be worse, say, to do something generic, like say, Dear Vox Media editorial? Would that be worse, or would it be worse to pick a name that turns out to be the wrong name?
The wrong name.
But is someone who works there?
Off the top of my head, I think I'm more inclined to say, hiring manager for the role. I think that would be more my inclination as I read it. Yeah, that'd be my gut.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good evening, panel and audience. I'm Jordan Muthra. I'm a graduate student in media management. In an ever-changing landscape of the media, like, there are certain jobs that didn't exist at the point of me starting college. So my question is, like, what is like the metric that you guys go by, or Nancy specifically too, if you want to elaborate a lot. What's the metric that you use to determine whether or not a person is a fit for a position when, say, they don't have the experience in that position, but they're passionate about the production process, and aspiring media students of this generation are trained to be flexible. So how do you account for that in this industry?
I don't know if accounting for it is the easiest part, but it is disposition. So when we've all talked about a degree of flexibility that somebody would bring to the party, it's actually, to me, what that means might be something different than it means to someone else. But what that means is somebody who's willing to initiate and is comfortable with changing priorities. So how someone can differentiate themselves with that is they tell me about how they took charge in a situation that they didn't have a lot of structure, and how they were able to turn it into something successful. And all of us use some sort of behavioral-based interviewing questions, which we will all ask you about a situation where you thrived in. And that's the way that you would distinguish yourself.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Oren Hershander. I'm a senior content creator at Yeshiva University. And I'm particularly interested in how stories are told, particularly how people's individual, whether it's biases or, let's say, like I particularly am interested in mental health affects how stories are told. And I'm really wondering how you're able to give in that individual identity into particularly entry-level roles. Vox has their wonderful fellowship program, which I applied to.
Yes. Thank you for your interest. That's great.
And I'm just kind of curious, like, how you can kind of have that mix between learning and the entry-level position, but also putting yourself into your work.
So my take beyond the fellow program is I think in your cover letter for applying for the role, if there's a particular angle that you're interested in pursuing, or I don't really want to say an angle, it's almost like a beat or an area that you find particularly interesting, I think you can talk about why that fits with the vertical or the passion point or the brand as something interesting that you're bringing to the table. It's almost like a pitch, right? Not maybe for a particular story, but how that area of content creation could really resonate with the brand's audience or the stories that brand is telling. I think there's a stage of the process we didn't entirely talk about, which I'm sure varies for each of our companies, but there's likely a part of the application process in which you're going to be demonstrating something, whether it's a test in which you're demonstrating your analytical ability in certain roles, or your coding ability, or your editorial and your content storytelling ability. And I think that's also ways in which you can weave in that aspect of your interest.
Anybody else have particularly interested in Vice, because you guys have such a unique brand, very distinct storytelling voice, how putting yourself into the work, especially on entry-level jobs?
Well, and particularly for some of the content creation, people have told their own stories that way very easily, whether it's a written story or a digital story. Usually when you supply some samples of your work, it will come through with what your passion points are. And if it is about you, you will have to still take an impassioned look at it and try and be a journalist. So whatever it is, you want to be able to demonstrate that you can still separate yourself from the story.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Hanif Sumner, and I graduated from the Newhouse School of Communication. One thing I want to ask is that you guys mentioned that, once you do a few interviews and you get, I guess, a general sense of, how the interview is going, it's good to follow up. If you've done a few interviews, if you've gone to a second round, if you've had a good rapport and you feel that you've snagged a job, but then you don't hear back from the recruiter, like, how do you know, how can you better your interview process if you don't get any feedback? Because, it's been a case where I've went and, interviewed and I thought it went well, but then you don't hear back. and it's not because of anything you did or if you don't know, and you don't want to go into more interviews and make mistakes. So if the recruiter doesn't give you feedback, how do you get better?
It's a great question. So that one of the challenges that we find is where you're restricted in what you can give as feedback. So that can be challenging. I think one of the big things I would say is really have your own radar on. Like, I mean, you can feel things go really well, right? But I think really sort of very good tip, when you come away from interviews, put notes down straight away, right? Don't, within the hour. So they often say that you'll retain the most. Just write everything down that you can, and you'll start to build a little bit of a picture. And I think you'll get snippets of feedback, or you'll sense from people what's resonating, and build on those pieces. You can absolutely ask for feedback, but sometimes it can be challenging to give. Recruiters are bound sometimes from either organizations rules or legal rules for not oversharing, and maybe giving those nuggets that you really want and we just aren't allowed to give.
Right.
I think another just personal matter, again, if you're maybe interacting a fair bit along the way with the hiring manager, him or herself, is the notion of this is someone you potentially could be working with. So what's the relationship you want to have with them, and how might you communicate with them if you were in a work setting about something? So it's a notion of, if you reach out to them and understanding that, hey, I thought our last conversation went pretty well. I recognize you may be busy. The job profile might have changed. You might have met other candidates. Is there any update you could provide, or anything, just in a way that doesn't, feel like you're impeding on, like you need to let the hiring manager have the time to interview other candidates, because that's part of the whole thing. But at the same time, in recognition of you're a little bit advocating for yourself to say, hey, I'm a peer, or I'm a colleague and potential colleague, and I recognize that you may be really busy. I just want a little bit of information.
Yeah, definitely have sympathy for their job, because you don't want to
Yeah.
pester, but like everyone here, there's a fine line between being over persistent and following up, and it's kind of hard to figure where that is.
It's completely
So-
understandable.
Totally. And one thing that we didn't talk about was sort of sending thank you notes.
Which I think is number one.
They're an absolute must, right? So that's your first post-interview communication with the interviewers. Let's say it's just with the hiring manager. So that then gives you, so from the way Google works is then you've got the communication with the hiring manager as well as the recruiter. And I think there are just ways of wording communications where you leave the door open for communication to come. So you create every possibility for the communication to come back. And then it's like you've left no stone unturned, but you haven't gone and like wrangled somebody to the point where you're like, I mean, we've seen messages of, I haven't heard from you, and that's, it's another big no-no. Sort of vent your frustrations and then write a nice note.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kayvon Afshari. I want to thank our panelists, our moderator, and the Center for Communication for putting this on. I'm particularly interested in editorial positions for reporters and producers, and I have two quick questions with that in mind. First, one of the main primary tasks of reporters and producers is to submit frequently high-quality story pitches. So I'm wondering, how would you perceive an applicant bringing printed pitches with him or her to the interview? Would you see that as kind of useful information, or would you see that maybe as a little forward and maybe jumping the gun? And secondly, I'm also curious, to what extent do you value an applicant's social media clout? That is to say, would you value presumably an applicant who has 1,000 Twitter followers over one who has 200?
Potentially, yes. It would have higher value. Somebody bringing pitch ideas with them, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that can create a much more dynamic conversation and can represent themselves better of what they're interested in.
Okay.
Yeah, the more you, when in the interview, the more you can show what your qualifications are, and the better impression you can make on the during the interview is only going to help you.
I think my guess is that in order to have gotten sort of to the interview stage, you've probably shown your ability to write and produce content in some way, whether it's linking to something or showing some history. And so there's already a expectation and rapport that whoever the candidate is, that you're probably very good at what you do already, which is terrific. And I think the ability to talk at maybe a higher level about the content that you might be producing or pitching or in discussions, I think probably only elevates the conversation, so long as it's done in a way that is natural to the interview conversation and recognize that the interviewer has some agenda items that they themselves are trying to assess during the conversational process.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm a graduating senior at Fashion Institute of Technology, where I study advertising, marketing, and communications. I'm particularly interested in going into social media, and a lot of these applications have questions like describe yourself in under 140 characters. And I find myself staring at it, what do I want to focus on? What do these people want to see? Should I base my answer on what kind of company it is, or should I kind of use the same sort of answer for each response? Do you guys have any suggestions about that?
I mean, I think you want to be true to yourself. You don't want to, if you're applying for 3 different jobs and they're somewhat different, you still want to be who you are. So, I mean, you certainly want to adapt it somewhat to that particular job, but you don't want to create a persona that's not yourself, because that's not going to benefit you.
Well, do you want to focus on like stuff about specifically what you do in your job life, or is it cool to show your personality as well? Like, do you mesh the two? I mean, can you think of a good example, maybe? I don't know. Sorry. Is that too much?
So I think it's great to show your personality, as long as Joe was saying maybe you don't put the party picture on LinkedIn. It's the same sort of way in which you're conveying your personality in a way that comes across as authentic, but also professional enough that it would be appropriate in a work environment.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Natalia. I'm a senior at New York University. And so I know many of your companies recruit reactively. So like if there's a position open, you may want someone to start relatively soon. So for like May graduates who can start working upon graduation, so a week after, when do you suggest is the best time to actually submit your application in your companies?
It's probably around, for us, it's probably around 6 weeks prior to that. If there was an opening somehow or another between the interviewing process and availability, if you're not able to start within a month, that might be a deterrent.
Okay. Thank you.
That's for us.
Similar. Our normal recruiting process usually takes about 2 months, sometimes sooner, sometimes longer, but within that time period.
I think I would just add from the bigger organization perspectives, be aware whether you're looking for a unique role or whether it's part of a graduate intake program, because, and make sure you read the website really well, because there may be dates in there. We have intakes at various points in the year, and then we will recruit throughout the year knowing when the start date would be that would coincide with graduation dates.
Okay.
And I would say we have a few roles on our site right now that specifically acknowledge that they are summer roles or it's a fellow position, as the gentleman said earlier, and they usually indicate like a start time because of that temporary nature. Otherwise, all the other roles are sort of start as soon as we find the best person, the best candidate for that position.
Hi, good evening. My name is Valentina. I'm a marketing graduate student at NYU, and I have 2 quick questions. So the first one, you talk about social media. Do you consider a red flag when you're looking for the candidate's background if their social media accounts are private?
No, I don't.
No.
Okay, good. I mean, nothing to worry about, but like a professor just mentioned this, and I think that you said it, there's like a line between the professional and the personal life. And okay, so the second question.
Sorry, I might elaborate on that. If you're applying for a role like an engagement editor or something where you're actually expected to be particularly strong in social media, it would be really hard to demonstrate that if we couldn't see that. Or
I would read that as your Facebook settings are, yes, all your friends can see your photos, but not some average person just searching your name.
Yeah.
So manage your social media footprint carefully and professionally.
And then, so I'm an experienced professional, but I've never had an experience within the media industry, and it's something that I'm really looking for. So what do you think would be the things that I could showcase that would make me a potential candidate for a position within your companies, besides, obviously the impeccable resume, LinkedIn profile, blog, website, you name it?
So I think there's lots of roles at our companies that are not actually editorial content creation, right? We're all up here as part of media companies in which we work in a people capacity. There's a lot of, obviously, sales and marketing. There's a lot of technology. I actually oversee office operations, corporate IT. There's so many roles if you think about what really goes into creating media companies and technology companies. We've been focused, I think, a little bit more on the content editorial side, maybe a little bit more, based on at least my interpretation of many of the folks in this room. But there are roles across the company, and there's an easy way to leverage your skills in a certain function area that could translate into media industry.
Yeah, you've got ad ops, you've got audience development, you've got programmatic marketing. There's more than just the content creation piece of it.
We have account services and other areas of creative design.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to everyone who came here tonight. Thank you to our amazing panelists.
Yeah, I did. She actually